The morning sun spilled gently across the sprawling lawns of the Cartwright Estate, throwing streaks of gold on the dew-soaked grass. The mansion itself, perched like a sleeping giant at the end of the long driveway, seemed to glare at outsiders with its stone facade and towering pillars. To many in town, it wasn't just a house but a fortress that guarded the most formidable woman anyone had ever known. Eleanor Cartwright, widow of one of the wealthiest financiers of the last generation, had a reputation that echoed far beyond the estate walls. The townspeople whispered about her with a mixture of awe and dread. She had broken assistants, maids, and nurses alike, reducing them to tears or driving them to pack their bags in the middle of the night. Her son, Charles Cartwright, had become something of a legend himself, a millionaire who inherited his father's empire and expanded it into a global investment dynasty. But for all his wealth, influence, and intelligence, Charles faced a battle at home he had never been able to win, finding someone who could last more than 2 weeks caring for his mother. The gates creaked open that morning to admit a modest sedan. Inside sat Amara Jackson, her hands gripping the steering wheel just a little too tightly as she followed the winding path toward the house. She was no stranger to challenges. 10 years as a nurse in a crowded urban hospital had prepared her for nearly anything. She had seen gunshot victims, raging patients, families fractured by grief. She had endured sleepless nights, double shifts, and the gut-wrenching moments when even her best care couldn't save a life. But still, her stomach knotted at the thought of facing the woman who had become infamous for her cruelty. She had read the warning signs. A nurse in town had whispered to her in the diner the night before, "You won't last a week. That woman, she doesn't want help. She wants someone to blame. Don't take it personally, honey, but she'll chew you up and spit you out like the rest of them." Amara had only smiled politely, thanked her, and returned to her meal. She had already made her decision. This job wasn't just a paycheck, though the salary Charles had offered was more than generous. It was a chance to prove that even the hardest heart might soften if someone stayed long enough to see the pain beneath the thorns. The car rolled to a stop in front of the mansion's grand steps. Amara took a deep breath, grabbed her modest leather bag from the passenger seat, and stepped out. The house loomed larger now, every window like an unblinking eye studying her movements. She straightened her shoulders, adjusted the neat bun of her hair, and mounted the steps with calm determination. The door opened before she could knock. A tall man in a sharp gray suit stood framed in the doorway, his expression equal parts relief and skepticism. Charles Cartwright, in the flesh, was far more striking than any photograph in the business magazines. His presence carried an effortless authority, but his eyes betrayed fatigue, the kind that money could not erase. "You must be Nurse Jackson," he said, his voice even but edged with weariness. "Yes, sir. Amara Jackson." She offered her hand, and he shook it firmly. "Thank you for coming." His gaze flicked briefly over her shoulder, scanning as if to confirm she had not already decided to retreat. "I won't sugarcoat it. My mother is difficult." "I've been told," Amara replied smoothly. "But I believe everyone is more than their reputation." One of his eyebrows arched ever so slightly, as though he found her optimism quaint. Still, he stepped aside and gestured for her to enter. The foyer spread out before her like a museum, with marble floors, high ceilings, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors lining the walls. Everything smelled faintly of lavender polish and something older, something that lingered from the past like a ghost. Charles led her down the hall, his voice low as though the house itself might be listening. "She's in the sunroom at this hour. I'll warn you, she doesn't like surprises, she doesn't like change, and she certainly doesn't like strangers. Just do what you can. And if it gets to be too much, don't feel guilty about walking away. No one has lasted." Amara's shoes clicked softly against the marble. "I'm not planning on leaving, Mr. Cartwright." He glanced at her with a flicker of curiosity, but he said nothing more as they approached the double doors at the end of the corridor. He pushed them open, and sunlight poured into the hall. There she was. Eleanor Cartwright sat upright in a regal armchair, her posture perfect despite her frail frame. A silk shawl draped over her shoulders, and a string of pearls glimmered at her throat. Her hair, silver and meticulously styled, caught the morning light. But it was her eyes, sharp, hawk-like, unyielding, that commanded attention. They fixed on Amara instantly, narrowing with suspicion. "So," Eleanor said, her voice as sharp as the edge of glass, "another one. Do they think parading nurses through here like cattle will change anything? Tell me, girl, how long do you plan to last? 2 days? 3? Charles inhaled quietly, as though bracing for the storm, but Amara did not flinch. She stepped forward, placed her bag gently on a side table, and met Eleanor's gaze head-on. "I'll last as long as you'll have me, Mrs. Cartwright," she said calmly. For a fleeting second, the older woman's expression faltered, but then her lips curled into a smirk. "We'll see about that."